PhotoShelter is the leader in online portfolio websites and tools for professional photographers. We help you get business, do business, and keep business.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Alan Murabayashi speaking to you from PhotoShelter World Headquarters here in New York City. We have a very, very interesting webinar today about an emerging part of photography that's come out. It's been around for a couple of years, but it's really kind of exploded, and the price has come down enough that it's getting really interesting for even hobbyists to play around with. Before I make the introduction to our guest panelists today, I want to do some housekeeping notes. To the right of your computer, you should see a GoToWebinar control panel. And from that panel, you can ask us questions as we go along. We'll do our best to sort of incorporate the questions into the conversation. And we have the lovely Sarah Jacobs also from our office answering and monitoring questions as we go along. And we're also going to be on Twitter today. So if you follow us at PhotoShelter, and you can also hashtag any comments or questions that you have with hashtag aerial photo, and that's the singular for whatever reason. But with that, let me introduce you to my often referred to as my West Coast doppelganger, Eric Cheng. Eric, how are you doing?
Very good. Thanks so much for having me.
Eric, we've known each other for a little while. You've been sort of the underwater guy running the website What Pixel for many, many years, and now it seems like you're emerging from the water and taking to the air. Why don't you tell us a little bit about kind of your forays into photography?
Yeah, so I actually going underwater for me was the reason I became a photographer, because it was the inspiration that I needed to become interested in taking pictures and sharing them with people, and really discovering these interesting stories that happen underwater, which are so unusual, amazing that nature has given us these bizarre creatures that we never see except to eat, and so for I don't know, about 10 years, I was really in the field most of the time, underwater taking pictures. And over time, I just, I was in these amazing places that are not photographed very often, except underwater. And often there would be another perspective that I wanted to get. So I'd climb up the masts of these big Indonesian yachts, these schooners, and you climb 100 feet up and dangle off this thing and take some pictures, and of course you're attached to the boat, so there's only so much you can do from there. And so I always wanted to put a camera up above these environments to get that aerial perspective. And I did go up in helicopters a couple times to try to get those pictures, and it's very expensive, not as easy as it looks. And of course, if you don't get the shot in the hour or two you have the helicopter, you're not going to get the shot. So anyway, I've been looking at these hobbyist multi-rotor, quadcopters, hexacopters. We have some pictures here. Marine mammals. I love whales and dolphins, and photographing them in the wild. And this guy on the left just, I looked up on a shark dive, and he was just there. So a little unexpected to have an animal there. And then sperm whales to the right, and finding these whales in the wild can be difficult, and we rely on local expertise and hydrophones and things. And if we could do some aerial survey stuff to find them, that would help as well. I haven't done any of that, but
so you were a computer science major, both for your bachelor's and your master's. It seems like you have a fairly technical approach to all of your photography.
Yeah, I have a technical approach in the beginning to all of my photography, because most of the photographic pursuits that I'm involved in are highly technical. Underwater photography is a good example. There's a lot of gear involved. We shoot with normal cameras, and we house them in waterproof enclosures, but optics work differently, and lighting is challenging because water strips away light from red, all the way down the spectrum, so you get these kind of blue-green pictures. And so most people who get into underwater photography never graduate past technical mastery. Mm-hmm. And so I feel like you get the technical stuff out of the way, just do it, understand it, get everything under your fingertips, and then really that's where photography begins. And so I mean, it's great because it's challenging, which means that not as many people are doing it, so the pictures are perhaps a little more unusual than what your friends are doing, which is always good for photographers. But it's also a shame that it prevents people from doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and doing having a software background, I think, helps in pretty much every industry now. It's just if you are empowered to do things like write code for a website, you can get something online and share it with people much easier.
The costs for underwater photography, we really haven't seen sort of a dramatic decline in the way that we have with the drone aerial photography. So I guess it's still, and obviously the technical challenge of breathing underwater introduces a variable that might keep a lot of people out of that realm.
Yeah, the dive gear, survival gear stuff, that's all pretty much been the same. I mean, it's very reliable now. That's one big difference. And the underwater photography gear it's not that we couldn't make it cheaper. It's that there aren't enough people doing it to make it cheaper. So, the housings we use are from relatively small companies. They don't make very many of them. They're machined out of aluminum. They're very expensive, and they can't get the cost down through economies of scale. So I think it'll in the high end of underwater photography, it will always be expensive.
Yeah.
But of course you have, GoPros and lots of waterproof models from all sorts of different manufacturers now, making it very easy to snorkel with the camera. So, every year the depth rating goes down. Now it's maybe 10 meters or something. So you could take a camera that looks like a normal point and shoot, but happens to be waterproof, which is still very bizarre to me. And it's especially scary to put it in salt water.
Yeah.
And then, you can go for a little 30-foot dive and take that camera down.
So before we move straight into the aerial photography, why don't you tell us a little bit about WetPixel and that community there?
Yeah, WetPixel is a community that grew out of a bunch of people who had no local community. In the beginning, we were doing digital underwater photography, and that, we always had to say digital underwater photography because there's this big, analog underwater photography movement. Everyone was shooting film. So we had this community site where we posted news and could chat. We had a forum up in about 2001, and just grew into a really great community and resource for anyone interested in underwater photography. And so, we hang out in the forums, we post breaking news, and we post portfolios of people doing beautiful work. So it's a good resource, and if you're interested in underwater photography, it's a great place to go hang out.
And now the topic of today's talk, the drones, otherwise known as unmanned aircraft systems, or UAs or UASs. And I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on the legality of it. Obviously, I think drones it's kind of a loaded term because of all of the stuff we're doing in Afghanistan with them and other places in the Middle East. But from the best of what I've seen so far, there really isn't any licensing need from the Federal Aviation Administration standpoint if you are doing drone photography for non-commercial purposes, right?
Right. I mean, that's the way we understand it. Everybody who flies one of these things has their own take on how legal what they're doing is, and that that's part of the problem right there. Basically, we have very little information other than the FAA saying if you're doing this for hobby, non-commercial use, it's legal as long as you follow these guidelines, and the guidelines are not necessarily laws. And so some people say, well, they are laws, and there are of course plenty of people breaking these or not paying attention to these guidelines. But the guidelines are also sort of fuzzy. It's like, don't fly around people,
Yeah.
Okay, well, what does that mean? It probably means don't fly in a stadium above a giant crowd, but what about a street that has 3 people on it? Can you fly down that street if there are no cars? Maybe. I don't know. I think everyone has their own take, and people fight a lot in the forums about this stuff.
Right. So your take is really that you're approaching it from a hobbyist standpoint. Is that how you sort of justify it to the pundits out there?
Yeah, absolutely. And no one's accused me of doing any of this like commercially. I think even categorizing activity as being commercial is a little bit fuzzy, because if I come on and talk about my aerial photography work and I happen to be a photographer, does that mean I'm promoting myself, and therefore does it qualify as being commercial use? And so I'm not sure. One thing I do is I definitely don't take money for what I'm doing with these, and I just pursue projects that I think are interesting personally, so I won't shoot real estate or something.
Right.
And in the meantime, we're all just sort of waiting for some certification or whatever it is that the FAA has been mandated to do by 2015. We're all just waiting for that, and I'd be happy to go get certified, but there's no way to do it.
Yeah, well, I'm still waiting for them to get rid of the rule in regards of turning off my cell phone when I'm taking off in an airplane. So hopefully we'll get that drone ruling as well. But so basically, I mean, here's the URL there for the FAA. But basically, you have to be under 400 feet. You don't want to be flying around sensitive areas like military installations. Obviously, you don't want to be putting people in danger, et cetera. And you can't do it for a commercial purpose. I'm sure there's a lot of nuance in there, but that's kind of the general gist that most of the hobbyists are approaching.
Right. And the more you're in the model aircraft industry, the more you tend to follow these rules because you've been doing it your whole life. These new inexpensive quadcopters don't require you to sign anything when you buy them. They don't require any sort of, you don't have to join a club to do it. You just could get one, and then you walk out into your backyard and you launch this thing and fly around. So, it's a lot of it's education and trying to encourage people not to do things that could potentially be very dangerous. Of course, you're always on the other side of that, for someone else, because there's someone else who's definitely more safety conscious than you are out there. Mm-hmm. And we know, while you're looking at this guy saying, oh, you shouldn't do that, someone's looking at you saying the same thing.
Yeah. So, I think it was the Gizmodo website. I was looking at it as I normally do every day. And there was some headline where, amazing epic video of surfers. And I watched it, and I guess I was slightly surprised, but not that surprised that you were the guy behind this video. We do have a bit.ly link there for those of you that want to check it out. Tell us kind of the entrance into the aerial photography. What sort of considerations did you have when you decided to go into something kind of new?
I think it took me actually a few years to get into it because it was actually, frankly, it was very intimidating. I started looking at these things in the middle to end of, maybe it was like 2007, 2008. I found these videos of hexacopters carrying cameras, and I thought, this is obviously going to be huge, and how can I get one? And at the time, it was not easy. It was, even though I was technical, you had to order all this equipment from Germany, and then follow some German wiki and try to compile it, and stick this thing on a chip and hope your flight controller worked. And it was funny, I was looking at a new friend, an acquaintance in this industry's early videos, and he's got a crash compilation video. And he's crashed so many times, he has a video dedicated to crashing. And that's how it was in the beginning. And so it took me, I just watched the industry for a long time, and what I did was I bought little toys, those little coax helicopters that sell now for like 30 or 40 bucks, but then were, I don't know, $100. And I flew around my living room. I was mocked by my wife. And but I think what's great about this, flying these things, is that they fly exactly the same way the bigger ones fly. So if you can master one of these $30 toys and make the thing whip around your living room without hitting anything, you can pretty much fly one of these big things. So I spent really like 2 years flying the little things on breaks. I'd take a break from work and go fly a battery's worth, which is like 5 to 10 minutes. I started building slightly larger ones that could hold cameras. Mm-hmm. But these, I wasn't in this multi-rotor industry. So really, it was the Phantom. Everyone who looks into this eventually finds the DJI Phantom, which is sold off the shelf for like $500 now. Yeah. And
that price has really come down, because when we spoke in the summer, it was like $650, and now it's like $475.
Yeah, they dropped the price $200, really in preparation for the next one coming out, which should be in a month or so. And so they're actually fairly cheap, for what they are. Yeah, $400 to $80, GPS lock, and you can just throttle the thing up, and it will just hang in the air in front of you. And so I don't know, I bought that because I didn't really want to be part of the hobby. And I mean, I am part of the hobby now. I build these things on the side. But the reason I build them is to educate myself in case I have to fix it, and then I don't have to take it into a distributor, and which is, very convenient as well. No, but I can open it up and try to debug it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's how I got into it. It really took about 3 years, maybe 3.5 years, and the last since January, so the last 9 months or so of constant practice with these things.
So this is a still from that video that we were talking about that you made of surfers in Santa Cruz. It looked like you were contending with some wind. How high were you getting the copter up for this, and what were sort of the environmental challenges of being outdoors rather than just kind of running it in your living room with your wife?
Yeah, the wind is always a challenge. Not so much because the aircraft can't fight the wind, because most of these little ones can. I mean, you can fly these things in 15 knot winds without any problem. But what happens is the footage becomes pretty unstable because the quadcopter is trying to stabilize itself the whole time. And the other thing is, if you're not comfortable flying, then wind can be problematic if GPS doesn't work for some reason, and then you have to basically fly it against the wind all the time. And if you're not comfortable, that's when you lose your lose your investment.
Right.
So mostly it was wind that was the issue, and of course shooting very, very wide. We're shooting fisheye lenses on these GoPro cameras, and so you asked how high it was. Well, the new ones come with telemetry, so that shows you how high you are. But until now, everyone's basically been flying blind, trying to stay under that 400-foot ceiling. 400 feet up with a fisheye lens looks like people say, wow, you can see the curvature of the Earth. Well, you really can't. It's like, it's just lens distortion.
Right.
But it looks like it's really high. And so you can get really interesting perspectives, even going up only 400 feet. And so, yeah, it was really an experiment. Surfers seem like the perfect subject because you don't get to see them from this point of view very often. You see them at tournaments, but you don't get to see the local surfers just surfing, when there's a little bit of a swell coming up. And I thought it was, it was fascinating. It was from a learning perspective to try to shoot moving objects, kind of looking at a monitor, because we're flying line of sight, but you can compose by looking at a monitor, which shows what the camera's seeing.
I wonder, when you're underwater, you've shot primarily stills underwater, and I know that you ventured into some video in the past few years, but it seems like all of the video work you're doing is kind of primarily focused around, aerial work is primarily focused around video. And I'm wondering if you think there's something about this bird's eye view, speaking completely from a creative point of view, that makes it more suitable for video rather than just a still.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I like both, and I think the challenge now is that very few systems allow you to shoot both at the same time. So I make a decision, and I often will do 2 flights just so I can get stills, because I know I'm going to write a magazine article, and they'll ask for stills. And of course, stills can be beautiful in a very different way. But video is something that people immediately relate to, and with surfers, for example, the movement of the waves breaking, and the surfers kind of in that environment is really interesting. And I think camera movements, these quadcopters and multi-rotors allow you to move the camera sort of like they're on, like a crane, or it's hard to do a vertical dolly movement, right, unless you have something very advanced. And with this thing, I can just sort of throttle up and it goes up. So one of the videos that I like to show before people know what this is a video of a friend of mine, Julian. He's walking on the beach. I don't know if you've seen this, but just walking on the beach, and you see him sort of look at the camera, and then he does this like very dramatic, air blast move, like fireball move from, Street Fighter. Right. And the camera just shoots out like 500 feet instantly. It's sped up. And that can be totally unexpected if you don't know that you're looking at someone shooting from an aircraft. Right.
So the camera that you're using for both video and stills on the DJI Phantom is the GoPro 3?
It's the GoPro Hero 3 Black.
Hero 3 Black.
Yeah.
And in terms of the surf video, how many hours of footage or minutes of footage did you have to compile to get to that final product, which was maybe 2 or 3 minutes long?
It was all done within a 2-hour visit to Steamer Lane, and I'm fairly conservative over water with these things, and so I'll typically fly 5 to 6 minutes per battery, and I have 7 batteries. So we're talking,
Wow.
say, 40 minutes of footage, and some of that footage is me exploring in the beginning as well, since I had never flown in that place, so I didn't know what it looked like from the air, so I had to fly around to see what it looked like. And it's edited down. I mean, I just did it as a quick edit for fun, really, but it hit Gizmodo and ABC and a whole bunch of other places pretty quickly. So I think if I could have gone back, I might have paid more attention to the editing.
So here is kind of the list of items that you were using on that shoot there. So the DJI Phantom quadcopter. And we saw a little photo of you earlier, kind of hovering over your head there. So that's about $479. The GoPro Hero is $329. And will you explain what a gimbal is for the audience?
Yeah, a gimbal is basically something that allows something else to rotate around an axis. In this context, it's something that lets you stabilize the camera, keep the horizon level. So you mount a camera on the gimbal. There's a sensor that tells the gimbal controller to keep me level. Basically says stay level, and so as the quadcopter moves around or anything, you can hold it as well. The motors, brushless motors, automatically compensate. So, practically speaking, when you put one of these things in the air, even if there's a wind, it sort of feels like you have a steady cam that's floating around. It's super rock solid, and there are certain things that can't overcome, but if you're shooting video in the air and you're not trying to do one of these like fly-through dramatic things, pretty much you need a gimbal. And the price ranges from around $150 to, I don't know, thousands of dollars. I mean, for a GoPro, maybe the high end would be $700 or $800. And they're like magic, and they've only been around in the inexpensive world since April or so. So it's a very new thing. They've been in the high end for some time.
Yeah, and we've seen kind of over the years non-gimbaled aerial shots that just look horrendous because there's so much vibration and the horizon's moving all around as you move the copter.
Right. And that's a big problem. When you're shooting stills, it's not as much of an issue because you can take a lot, and then you can of course straighten the horizon and just shoot a lot. But for video, every movement matters.
The monitoring of the video, and I guess let me ask the first question is, do you have any controls over the gimbal itself, or is it just steadying itself in this case for $150?
The gimbal controllers all have inputs pretty much for roll and pitch, so you can move the camera view up and down, and you can roll it from side to side. Practically, we don't use roll because I want the horizon to be level, but I can control the pitch of the gimbal. It was something that involved soldering, but increasingly is being built into some of the the mainstream quadcopters that are coming out. So I think it will not require soldering very soon, and everyone will be able to control it. And then you need an analog video transmitter, which in the RC hobby are very common and inexpensive. And so you can buy one of these things and get a special cable. You can make it yourself or buy one from a GoPro, and just plugs the video signal into the transmitter. And then on the other end, you have a receiver and any monitor or goggles. So you can have your field of view completely covered by goggles that are plugged in, and just fly it like you're looking out of the front of the thing, or you can fly it from an LCD in front of you.
Wow, that's crazy. So in this case, you are controlling the copter and looking at the video simultaneously and kind of going back and forth and guessing kind of what kind of shot you're getting?
Yeah, that's right. So I will look at the quadcopter because I like to have line of sight. But if I lose orientation, if I momentarily lose it, because they are pretty small, and if you fly it, I don't know, if you fly 400 feet away, you can lose it if you look away even for a moment. So it's really great to have that first-person view so that I can reorient and and fly back. It FPV, this first person view stuff, is its own hobby. I mean, people
Right.
put them on aircraft and fly them very far, and they do it. It's really for fun, more like sport flying. And so you'll see people they're like sitting in a chair with goggles on, kind of just flying like they're flying in a game.
Right. You have you lost any gear while you're doing this? Like what's the failure rate on this stuff?
Well, I've crashed a lot of these things, especially when I was starting early. I crashed around my house. I've put the Phantom up and crashed into trees, but they're actually quite sturdy. And especially if you know how they're built, they're very sturdy, because it's very hard to destroy one of these things. You can almost always recover or change a propeller out. I had one catastrophic failure in Mexico. I was flying over the point of this island, which is really beautiful, and there's a lot of wind, but the thing seemed fine, but it just dropped out of the sky. And if you go on YouTube and do a search, you'll find some videos where this happens occasionally. These are very complicated device. They have motors, they have electronics running them, and they're assembled at a factory where people are soldering power connections, and so I have no idea what happened, but I lost an entire rig. So, Phantom, gimbal, camera, SD card, into the ocean, and it was unrecoverable. So that was very sad. But amazingly, insurance covered it. I have travel insurance for my equipment, and after a long time, probably it might have been their first claim like this. I got some money back, of course, with the minus the deductible.
Right. Oh, that's so funny. We have some technical questions in regards to what settings you're using on the GoPro. Are you shooting 1080 wide, and are you looking at higher resolution stuff like 4K or 2K at all?
I tend to shoot either 1080 or 2.7K, and it depends on a couple factors. One is the GoPro's, it's really wide at full wide, and so I don't always want to shoot full fisheye. So I'll shoot medium, which is only available at 1080. So if I really want to shoot medium, I'll shoot 1080. And I'll typically shoot the highest frame rate I can at that resolution, because when you slow down aerial footage a little bit, it looks smoother, and if waves are crashing slower, it's more dramatic. You can shoot at 60p and slow it down by 50% for web display, or more, slow it down to 24, and it looks really good. So I usually shoot 2.7K wide at 30 or 1080p at 60. If it's lower light, I'll tend to shoot 1080 at 30, a little bit slower frame rate. I also put polarizers on my GoPro over water, because I like to cut that reflection out.
Yeah.
And going forward, I would love to build a larger. I'm looking at Y6 multi-rotors, which have 3 arms and 6 propellers, so 2 props on each one. And I want to put something higher quality in the air. So I have a Blackmagic design pocket cinema camera, and that's the next camera that I'm going to put up. And that's really in the hobby world. So I'm looking at frames. I'm looking at there are frames from all sorts of companies. One of them is 3D Robotics here in Berkeley and San Diego. They have a nice folding Y6 frame, and their own flight controller and autopilot. So I think the hobby for me will be changing a little bit. Portability is a huge factor in all of my decision making. I don't want to show up with a giant octocopter with a 5D on it, because I'm not shooting. First of all, I'm not shooting commercially, so it's not like I'm shooting for a film.
Right.
It's mostly hobby right now. And also, I want to be able to travel with it. If I leave the country and go somewhere else, the FAA doesn't have rules there. I have to check with the local rules, of course, but I can use that footage commercially. So, if I have footage of whale sharks from the air, from the middle of the ocean, I'm going to sell it.
What kind of software are you using for post-production? We have a couple of questions in regards to kind of getting rid of the jelly effect and other movements that the camera might be introducing.
Right. So the jello it comes from CMOS rolling shutter artifacts, and you see it basically in any compact camera. If you move it sideways, you get vertical line smear, And you get it a lot with quadcopters and multi-rotors because you have high frequency vibration coming in from the motors and the propellers. So if your propellers are not balanced, meaning that one side is heavier than the other, as it spins, it's going to introduce vibration into the frame. So the goal basically is to get rid of that vibration. And so what people do is they balance the propellers. You get something that you can just buy it. It's called a prop balancer, and you use tape or sandpaper to either add weight or remove weight from one side of the prop. So that solves a lot of the vibration issue. And then all of these camera mounts typically have some kind of vibration isolator. So these either silicone balls or I like wire isolation a lot. I didn't even know it existed, but if you're really into mechanical vibration isolation, which some of the audience might be,
right?
Go do a search for wire isolator, and a whole new world will open up. So you do need to try to get that high frequency vibration out. For big movements, really the gimbal takes out all the movements of the quadcopter as it's trying to fight to stay stable against wind and your control movements.
And what sort of polarizer are you using on that rig that you have?
I've tried a couple polarizers. One thing that's tricky about gimbals is that they are designed to be used with perfectly balanced payload. So, for example, the GoPro has an off-center lens, and so if I stick a polarizer on it, it's going to throw the gimbal balance off. If you have your own gimbal with that's totally adjustable, you can account for this. But for example, DJI's gimbal locks the GoPro in place. It's meant to be used with a naked GoPro. So I'm using gimbals that are as light as possible, and polarizers. I use one. It's called the layer lens, and it's used to protect the GoPro lens. And then somebody made a replacement polarizer for it. So you take the lens off and you put the polarizer lens on, and that works very well for me. There are all sorts of adapters that people sell, of course, so that you can screw a threaded circular polarizer on the front of your GoPro. If you have a powerful gimbal, I think you could get away with that. I wrote this up on skypixel.org, which is a website that I run. It's my blog basically for aerial work, and so anything I do that requires research, I'll write about, because it took research, and I'd rather help people to become successful in this field.
So skypixel.org is that URL for those of you that want a little more technical detail on how he threw his kit together. We thought that we would show you some options for kind of medium price kits and high price kits. Obviously, the GoPro is a very, very small, lightweight camera. Oh, and I actually wanted to ask you, when you're shooting at 60 frames per second, are you able to get video stills out of that, or do you go up and specifically shoot stills?
I'll typically go out and shoot stills, although I have extracted stills, and they've been fine. I mean, especially for 5-inch magazine use or something, or web use. Stills pulled from video tend to be okay when they're viewed small, but they're not good enough for me. So I tend to just do another flight and try to capture stills.
We had a bunch of questions about people saying, can that DJI Phantom carry a DSLR? And the answer is no. It's a very small unit. So this is this is a type of setup that you would need to fly a DSLR. And you'll notice that the price goes up pretty significantly. I know some of you are actually adding up these figures, and I want to let you know that the total is approximate ballpark, just so I don't have lots of different numbers. But we jumped up from about $1,200, $1,500 now all the way up to like $40,000, $50,000 to get the weight of a DSLR like a Canon 5D. And this obviously is like it's got a lot more stuff on it.
Yeah, and just as a side note to the SLR kit, if you are, I mean, you can buy like a cinema rig, they're calling them, ready to go from one of these companies and pay this much money. If you're technical, if you can solder and follow instructions and not be afraid, which are really the biggest issues, you can build a rig that will carry an SLR for under $2,000. And so it doesn't have to be this expensive, but of course you're trusting yourself to build something that holds a camera that is worth more than that.
Right, right.
So I think, there, even in this middle range here, it starts very low and goes very high, and you get sort of polish and support for the more expensive ones. And of course, there's this whole class of camera. Of course, like the most popular, fairly good quality camera in the air right now is the Sony NEX7. People are using it because it's smaller and lighter. The optics are smaller and lighter. You don't have you don't have a mirror and an optical viewfinder path, which you just don't need in the air. And so there's this like gradient between what we showed in the last slide and this slide.
Yeah, yeah. I assume for a rig like this, you might need a camera operator and a drone operator as well. I mean, it's not only a matter of equipment. At some point, it's got to be a matter of bodies on the ground controlling all of this stuff.
Right. With these bigger cameras, people tend to use 3-axis gimbals. So in addition to pitch and roll, they support yaw, which means you can turn the camera you can rotate the camera sideways, even when the aircraft is not moving. So typically the legs will retract and you have a full view underneath the aircraft. And that usually requires a second operator, a cinematographer to be filming and a pilot to be flying. I think there's an opportunity for, for two things. One is a different interface. We use these 2-stick radios, which come from the hobby world, but that's very short-sighted. There's another interface that will enable a single pilot and cinematographer to do, with a lot of practice, to do very, very complex movements, and we haven't seen it yet. And also for autonomy. I mean, you can imagine recording a flight and then playing it back. These things know where they are, and a lot of the open source flight controllers, like the one from 3D Robotics, just lets you draw a path over Google Maps. Right. And so you should be able to script the aircraft movement, and then then you can take over as a cinematographer during the next pass or the next 10 passes, and perhaps try to perfect that movement.
And that the flight path control and software, is that available on the lower price units like a Phantom, or is that something that you really have to move up to the next tier to have access to?
It's available in all tiers, and I think, it's really interesting that if you ask this question in 3 months, it'll be very different because everybody is doing it. The open source community is writing software against it, so you can download these like an Android app for free that will control your quadcopter if you have the right flight controller, and you can draw flight paths and missions. They call them missions with waypoints. And in a commercial company like DJI, they've had it in the high end, and they're trickling it down sort of into the low end as they see open source kind of doing it for free.
Right.
So I think we're going to see it's going to be part of what these things do. This is very early. The fact that they don't stop themselves before they crash into something is crazy, and I think it should be very simple to put in some more sensors. Either analysis of the video from the aircraft, or ultrasonic sensors. And we've seen various forms of these in toys and other products for a long time, but nobody's integrated it into one that just won't let you crash it into something.
Yeah. You mentioned 3 different cameras. So the first being the GoPro that you used. You mentioned the NEX. A lot of people are using that. And then you mentioned that you picked up a Blackmagic camera, which is a HD camera that also shoots RAW. So I'm wondering if it's your intent to kind of play with that RAW and shoot higher frame rates as well, since you can.
Yeah, I mean my goal is to shoot as high quality as I can from the smallest possible setup. So I want to fold this thing up and carry it on an airplane, and then unpack it at the destination and put it in the air. So I'm not interested in carrying SLRs. I'm going to put some kind of micro Four Thirds camera up for stills, because I think the quality is good enough. It actually is quite good, and the lenses are tiny. And then Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera, of course, takes micro Four Thirds mount lenses as well, so I can shoot video with that.
Yeah.
And it's really just the next step. And I think, while I've been pretty happy with the stills I've been getting from the GoPro, I would love to be able to do both. I mean, it'd be, the GoPro is great on a Phantom because it's relatively inexpensive as an entire rig. And so you can use it in situations in which there's more risk to the aircraft, for you losing the aircraft. And of course, it's very easy to carry around. But I'm sure there will be situations in which I want a better camera in the air.
We have a link at the bottom of this slide, bit.ly/freefly. Movi is the way that you pronounce that. So Movi is a manufacturer that's making a gimbal system. Their initial systems were replacement for Steadicam, which has kind of dominated the technology since the 70s. But if you get a chance, check this movie out as well. So it's a good. I think it was shot on Red. It's shot with this 3-dimensional gimbal system and color graded professionally. And there's a soundtrack and all of this stuff. So it's pretty impressive the type of shots that you can get with a good aerial operator and a good aerial rig. And speaking of which, here is just for fun, kind of the type of stuff that people are using in Hollywood. And it's a company called Flying Cam 3.0 Sarah with the gyro head. And the cost is approximate because I don't even know that they sell the unit per se. It's a helicopter and it requires a crew and whatnot. And if you're going to get the Red Epic M, $50,000 and the lens is $5,000. But this was the type of shot, if you did see Skyfall, where they're tracking motorcycles and then they pull up really high. And it's really just it's an unmanned helicopter is what it is.
The footage was, footage was amazing.
Here's a photo of you kind of monitoring what you're seeing from the copter there. What's the range of these transmission systems?
So like everything else in this hobby, the range depends on what you buy and can vary dramatically. So, if you build a system that's designed for first-person view and uses radio control that's very low frequency, I mean, they're designed to work. I don't even know what the numbers are, 40 to 50 kilometers away, longer than certainly I'm going to even think about flying, since I'm mostly interested in getting video and stills from the air. So the systems that I use are pretty much out of the box. I mean, I have a Spectrum radio that I use with the quads that I build. The Phantom will go, I think people have tested it around a mile, and really it's battery life that's the issue. It doesn't matter how much control you have if you can't make it there and back. And so people do these tests where they fly them out as far as possible and then fly them back. Most of the new systems coming out have fail-safe built in, so if you lose radio control or you run low on battery, they're designed to come back to home. So they'll just fly back to you, which has saved me a couple times, and most people I know who fly enough. So there are a bunch of safeguards built in to try to keep keep you in the game. So I think practically they go further than you want to take them. The consideration really is that if you're on some kind of very high frequency control, like 2.4 gigahertz, if you fly around something and there's you lose line of sight, trees even, you will probably lose radio. And what that means is your quadcopter will go into autopilot and try to come back at 20 meters for the Phantom comes back at 20 meters, and if there is a building in the way, it's going to crash into it.
And, excuse me. You said you're getting about 8 to 10 minutes off of the battery on the DJI Phantom.
Yeah, I mean, loaded with a gimbal and a camera, it's probably 8 minutes before I get battery warning. I tend to come back at 6 just to be safe when I'm over water or over something that might be hard to get to. This is going to change really quickly. Not battery technology, but for example, the next version of the Phantom that's coming out has a double capacity battery, more than double capacity, so it flies for more than 20 minutes without a camera, or with a camera on it. And so I think we'll see that the competition, the bar will have been raised, and everyone else will have to follow.
Yeah.
So I think we'll be seeing kind of 12 to 15 minute flight times with a gimbal just in the next couple months.
When you're taking stills, are you using the video monitoring, and how are you actually triggering the stills to go off?
Well, since I'm shooting mostly with GoPro these days, I just put it in time lapse. So I have it set to take one picture every 2 seconds.
Yeah.
And that's it. You just let it go. So it works pretty well. One of the reasons the Sony NEX systems are so popular, aside from there being gimbals built specifically for it, is that it's one of the few systems in which you can trigger stills and video separately via remote. So there's some guy, people make remote triggers for all sorts of applications, and one of the only cameras where you can do both is the Sony without getting complicated, like plugging in the USB.
Right. Interesting. You mentioned balancing out the copter and doing as much to eliminate vibration and using the gimbal. Are you doing any stabilization in post? And if so, what sort of software are you using?
I do some stabilization in post when it's necessary. Basically, if there's no wind, then I don't have to stabilize, even if there's a little bit of wind. And if there's a lot of wind, sometimes what happens, since my gimbal is 2-axis, I get the helicopter moving left, yawing left and right. And that's something that the gimbal does not account for. My gimbal doesn't. So I run Final Cut Pro 10 or X, and I run Adobe's CS6 production suite.
Mm-hmm.
I use both. I also use CoreMelt's lock and load stabilizer. I don't think any of these stabilization algorithms are actually work that well with this footage, because I often have to try all three, and then sometimes it'll do weird things. Final Cut the picture will just spin off the frame. I've seen that happen.
Yeah.
I don't know what it's doing. It got confused. Lock and load tends to work really well, and then occasionally doesn't. And then Premiere, of course, if you use what do they call it? Warp stabilizer. It only takes advantage of one CPU. So, it's not parallel processing, and so it can take me hours to stabilize a single clip. So I tend not to even try to use it in CS6 world.
Interesting. Have you done anything where you're shooting at 2K and that gives you a little more wiggle room to sort of stabilize the shot? I know a lot of people are saying we're going to shoot in 4K not because we want the resolution, but so we can actually crop in on the image.
Yeah, so I shoot in 2.7K a lot and crop in for stabilization. That works really well. It tends to break down in the Final Cut world because they don't like 2.7K. They say, well, is this 2K or is it 4K? Well, it's neither. And so I've had a really hard time working in Final Cut with 2.7K. And then Premiere, pretty much their warp stabilizers doesn't work for me because I'm not stabilizing a 3-second clip. I'm stabilizing, a 20-second like a 20-second clip, and that takes forever. And I have a Mac, 12-core Mac Pro, and it's just not using any of it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So then I use CoreMelt's lock and load, and if that works, which it usually does, then I'm happy. But practically, I have to try everything, and this is sort of what I do in all video editing on the Mac because I just feel like it's not well supported these days.
Yeah. The NEX7 can that be carried by the DJI Phantom, or do you need to upgrade because of the weight?
Now you need to upgrade. That's one of the kind of out-of-the-box supported cameras from DJI, and they sell a S800 hex, bigger hexacopter that holds a special gimbal that's designed for either the NEX7
Mm-hmm.
or the Panasonic GH2 or GH3. So very specific cameras. If you buy your own gimbal, you can buy one that holds the NEX fairly inexpensively and put it on any hexacopter, and it should lift it.
And for the Blackmagic, what are you going to use as your copter?
So that's the Y6 setup that I'm working on. So I'm
yes.
I'm still doing research because there are only a few of those frames out there, and the documentation in the hobby world is terrible. So you often can't even find you cannot find a picture, a real picture. You see a render. Nobody shows you the mechanism for folding, and then when you email them, they might respond maybe from their iPhone with a one-sentence thing, so it's not there yet. And I think it will be in a few months, and maybe 6 months. There will be a company that takes support seriously, who releases a frame, and I think a lot of people are going to buy them.
Yeah. Do you have any trouble carrying this rig into foreign countries? Are they thinking, man, this guy's like CIA or something at the customs?
Well, I've taken it to a few countries and not had any problems, mostly because the Phantom looks like a toy. So, when asked what it is, and you always get asked because when this thing goes through X-ray at customs, they want to know what it is. I say toy helicopter, and then usually they think, oh, that's so cool, and they want to look at it. So all the guys come over and and look at it. I did hear a story about two people trying to do like medical aid drops or something, going through Egypt and getting jailed for some number of months with quadcopters.
Oh,
So I haven't found that, the actual article or articles about that, but I've heard stories like that. But I haven't heard very many, and I know quite a few people who are traveling, but they're traveling mostly to Europe or through North America, in occasional trips to first world Asia. And I'll be taking it to Indonesia in February, as another experiment, and we'll see what happens there.
Now, I know you're not a lawyer, but we're getting a lot of questions regarding the legality, and a lot of people who say, "Hey, I deal with real estate. I'd love to do these aerial real estate shots, etc." What sort of guidance would you give people that have sort of commercial aspirations for this stuff?
Well, we pretty much only have we have some precedent in that the FAA has shut down at least one real estate person, one publicly, who's written about it, being shut down from doing these things. And taking a picture of a house for the purposes of real estate sales is definitely commercial. There's just no way to get around that. And even if you get someone to do it, I'll fly for free and then I'll do editing. I just don't think that's going to hold up if they actually go after you.
Yeah.
I don't know who goes after you, since the FAA is like a regulatory body. It's not really, I guess they can go after you if they want. And then right now there's a really interesting lawsuit going on. There's a guy who's flown a lot of the, he flew like the Grand Canyon and Statue of Liberty, all sorts of stuff like that, who's in a lawsuit right now.
Mm-hmm.
So depending on what happens there, I think if he gets nailed, then that's going to set precedent for a lot of the stuff that we do.
Yeah.
And if he gets away with it and, forces them to actually come up with clear regulations, then that'll be great, because then they'll have to actually come up with the regulations. I think what's really unfortunate right now is it's all sort of unknown and everyone argues about it. No one agrees. Nobody who reads everything has a clear picture of what's legal, what's not legal, what's enforceable. Enforcement is another issue.
Mm-hmm.
And so, unfortunately, what's happening is people are just sort of doing things, and this is what I'm doing too, because I don't, I assume what I'm doing is legal, and having the FAA say, yes, what you did was legal in Santa Cruz is a great thing, because I was sort of validated there.
Right.
But, I don't have that judgment for everything I'm doing.
Well, it seems like the past 3 weeks with the government shutdown would have been a perfect time to fly your drones at will.
Yeah, totally. I joked about that as soon as it happened. And, I think, well, one thing that a lot of people like to do is, or dream about doing, is going and flying national parks. And, we have some parks that have explicitly said you cannot fly. But
really?
It's funny because I just read correspondence between like Yosemite and a photographer, and he was like, no, you cannot fly in Yosemite. We may allow flights over 2,000 feet occasionally, but it takes, some number of months for approval. Why don't you try this other park? So it wasn't don't fly in national parks. It was don't fly in our national park, but try this other park.
Yeah. Are you, we started by saying drone is such a loaded word. And you said when you go through customs and whatnot, you refer to it as like a toy helicopter. What's the terminology that we should be using to be most kind of friendly towards the public?
I'm not sure there is a friendly term. I mean, in everything public I've done, the organizers have always stuck the word drone in the title, and I pretty much never use the word drone. I will always say it's a talk on aerial imaging. I'm trying to use UAS, which is Unmanned Aircraft System. That's the official term that's been adopted. It's not a public friendly term. UAS, UAS is an acronym. Acronyms no one knows what it stands for.
Right.
And you can't pluralize it easily.
That's a good point.
It's, is it UASs? And so I will say, I actually don't know. I vary. I talk about aerial imaging from multi-rotors. Multi-rotor aircraft is also not a friendly term, but it at least is just confusing and not scary. Mm-hmm. And so when I do these stories, if we talk about drones, I try to talk about the good things about drones and the responsible operators out there, and have successfully managed to get at least one news story out that was 100% positive about drone use.
Yeah.
But what I don't want is to use the word drone to hype it up too much because it just sounds bad.
I'm wondering, now speaking from sort of a marketing standpoint, obviously you're not the first person to be doing drone photography, drone aerial photography.
Right.
What do you think it was about the video that you created of the surfers that helped it to go viral? Whereas, there's a lot of other stuff that you can find on YouTube and Vimeo, but for some reason yours kind of caught people's attention.
Yeah, I'm definitely not the first person to do this, and I would never make that claim. There are lots of people who have paved the way with incredible amounts of hard work, and I think it may be like, and this is something that I've tried to promote in all of my public public talks or magazine or articles about using these things, is that it'd be great if people had projects in mind, even if they're very small. Like, I'm going to go document this particular thing, and I'm going to spend the whole morning there and collect footage, and then I'm going to edit it into something. And it doesn't have to take a lot of time. I mean, the Santa Cruz thing was, 2 hours of shooting. There was some driving and socializing involved. And then it took an hour to edit. And so it's really like 3 hours of flying and sitting on a computer for something that then, captures a lot of attention. And so really it's just like, have a project, plan the project, rope some friends into it, because a lot of my friends are interested in this stuff. So it can be a social thing as well.
Yeah.
But the way I started was going out to the local park and flying and then uploading the video. And like, nobody wants to see that video. I don't want to see video of someone's backyard or like
Right.
some park 100 times. I just don't care. And the only time I care is when I'm doing research for a certain piece of hardware, like a gimbal. I want this gimbal. I want to see how it performs in 10 different people's setups, and I'll go do the research.
Yeah.
So on the one hand, I'm glad that footage is out there. I tend to put this stuff on YouTube unlisted so I can send it to people who might be interested. And of course, all my early stuff is up, so you can see all the early experiments. They're terrible. But when you get to a point where you can fly competently and produce interesting footage, I think it's really just having consideration for the project and not just going out and shooting something random.
Right. So for the people who are listening and they've never done any sort of aerial photography and they've never dealt with copters and whatnot, if you had to say a budget and an amount of time that you're going to have to invest to get a quote usable product, what are we talking about?
Okay, so this is another thing that varies widely, but the most important thing is to become a competent pilot by far. It's the same thing in underwater photography. You have to be a good diver. You have to have absolute control of buoyancy, and the same thing applies here. If you cannot control the aircraft, you're going to get lucky and get a couple shots, but you're also potentially endangering yourself and others. And so I would say practice a lot with a quadcopter, and if you need to put a camera on it, get a quadcopter that can hold a housed GoPro. Mm-hmm. So the Phantom does this. The DJI 3D Robotics' new Iris has a GoPro mount. A lot of the new quadcopters that are coming out, the competitors, have GoPro mounts. So you just get a GoPro, put it in the housing, stick it on. That way, if you crash, you're not going to lose your camera probably. But mostly, it's just practicing. So I would recommend something like the Phantom. Right now, it would be the Phantom because it's really still the only thing that has been proven. It's $479, which means it's discounted. Very good price now. Mm-hmm. And then just practice flying that around all the time. And the other thing I recommend is getting a toy that they weigh like an ounce and they fly the same way. So there's one called the Blade Nano QX, and that, I think it's around $100 with a controller, and you can fly that around. It's got prop guards. You can crash it into your walls. You're probably not going to hurt anybody or anything, including itself. And if you do hurt something, the replacement parts are just a couple dollars. So it's really like, get as much flight time as possible and be considerate about how you practice. Like, don't just go hover and try to get footage, but fly figure eights, fly away from you, back to you very slowly. Mm-hmm. Don't be a cowboy about it. If you can't control it, it's not when you're calm that it's going to affect you. It's when your heart rate spikes because you're 10 feet from something and you realize that you don't know which way to turn, which way to move.
Right. So this isn't the sort of thing where I go out to the local camera store and I rent something for 2 days on the weekend and all of a sudden I have usable video.
I don't absolutely. I agree that it's not like that. And we get emails. I get emails, and my friends get emails all the time from people who say, "I have this project. It's on Saturday, and I just ordered a Phantom. How do?" And I'm like, "Okay, well, you're gonna crash,
Right?
And you might crash on set. First of all, you know, are you even allowed to use it on set? You know, I don't know. I don't want to get involved in those discussions, but it is absolutely not the sort of thing that you can just pick up and do unless you have a ton of self-control. You know, if you have 100% confidence that you can control yourself, then you could probably learn to hover the thing. Just put the thing in the air, get the footage, and bring it down without crashing it.
Right.
But as soon as you have to try to do some kind of aircraft movement, you know, there's no guarantee it'll work.
We have run out of time. It's been a really interesting and sort of fascinating look at an emerging technology that, you know, the price point has really come to the point where it's accessible to a lot of people. Eric is just one of these guys that's really giving to the community. You can check out that video if you didn't see the URL earlier at echengphoto.com. His new website talking about this helicopter, quadcopter, drone copter, aerial imaging and tutorial, skypixel.org. And for those of you who don't want to take to the air but want to get underwater, the 10, even more than 10 years old now, wetpixel.com is a great resource. Next week, I want to let you know that we have Jared Bauman, who's the founder of and president of Shoot.edit, talking about pinpointing your trouble points and finding solutions in your workflow. So they are a company that offers post-production services primarily for wedding photographers, but because of that, they're sort of experts in sort of raw workflow processing, etc. And you can register for that at bit.ly/shoot.edit webinar. But I want to thank Eric Cheng so much for joining us today. Eric, always great talking to you.
All right. Thanks so much for having me, and look forward to seeing you.
We did record this video, so you can see it on our blog probably in the next 24 to 48 hours. And in case you missed any of the details, you can review that, but I'll also go to Eric's website at skypixel.org. I want to thank you guys for joining us today. I hope to see you at the next webinar. Bye-bye.